everything we do in this life, we should be doing for God. Now remember, back in verse 17 of chapter 3, Paul tells the Christians at the church in Colossae to do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus. Whatever it is they do, they need to do it in the name of the Lord Jesus. But he gets even more specific here in verses 22 through 24. So let's look at that. It says, "Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. And whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men." Now, first of all, we need to look and see who he's talking to. He's talking to bondservants. What's that mean? This word in the original Greek language, it can mean a lot of different things. One way it's sometimes translated is slave. Well, the problem with that is that in our modern mindset in the 21st century, we think of slavery in a very specific way, and that's usually the terrible American slavery that was absolutely evil and reprehensible and totally wrong that happened in, the 18th, 19th century of America, where human beings became property that could be sold or bought. They were terribly mistreated. It was evil. American slavery and all the slavery around the world that was surrounding that time is totally evil. But a lot of the time in the Bible, we see this word for slave, and it doesn't mean exactly that. There are certainly instances in the Bible of slavery that look something like that. But this word is also used for some other things. And here it probably is referring to someone who works for someone else. Now, they're probably bound by some sort of oath that they're going to work for a really long time, and they're probably a very low-class citizen. They probably don't have a lot of say-so. They're considered a servant, but they're not quite what we would call a slave in modern times. And I think that the principles that Paul uses to talk to bondservants here, we can actually translate to our own situation here as free people who are not servants or slaves in the sense that we think of the word. I think that we can transfer this to anyone who has someone in charge of them. Yeah, you can think of this as you being underneath the authority of your teachers or underneath the authority of a boss at work. And this is how we ought to relate. It says, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters. So do the things that the people who are in charge of you tell you to do. Obey your teachers. Earlier, just a few verses earlier, Paul tells children, obey your parents. This is what Christians do. They are obedient to the people who are put in charge of them. Obey your bosses if you have a job that you're working at. Be obedient. But then Paul raises the stakes, and he tells them exactly how they ought to be obedient. Now, he says, not by way of eye service. What's that mean? He's not wanting you to just be obedient so that whoever's in charge sees that you're being obedient. Don't just work whenever they're watching so that you can know that they know that you're doing what they told you to. And not as people pleasers. Don't just work for the pleasure of the person that you're working for. Don't try and just build yourself up to make yourself look good in their eyes. But instead, with sincerity of heart, pleasing the Lord. Be obedient, not because the people told you to. Be obedient because God told you to. Be obedient because deep down in your heart, you want to live a life that honors the Lord, that is pleasing to God. So work hard, be obedient to the people who are in charge of you on this earth for the sake of God. And whatever you do, no matter what it is, he says, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for men. Don't do stuff halfway. Don't do stuff with a grudge. Don't do stuff like, I've got to do this now, and I'm going to just do it just enough to where I can get the job done, but nothing more. No, work heartily. Work hard. Do things to the best of your ability, always, at everything you do. And how? As if you were working specifically for the Lord. Think about if your boss or if your teacher or if your parent was God himself and you were doing this job for God himself. How well would you do it? He says in everything that you do it like that. Do it for me, not for your boss, not for your parent, not for your teacher. Do all of it for me. Work heartily as unto the Lord.